Good morning. Ayin Beis, Volume 3, page 1360. So we continue the discussion around the Nekuda Hashroshis of Malchus, as he calls it, the root point of Malchus, which, as he explained earlier, is rooted in the highest levels of Atzmus Ein Sof, the core that's beyond revelation. That's why it manifests like a Nekuda, only a point, a concealed point. And then there's the Binyan HaMalchus. HaMalchus is built up and filled up with revelation, but its Nekuda is a state of concealment, essentially. So there's Malchus as its root, and there's Malchus the Tosfos, that's an add-on, the additive that is built upon that core Nekuda. Zah, on the other hand, emanated as a entity of 6 facets. So that's why it's a mashpia. Even though it also has an element of absorbing, but Malchus is focused entirely on absorbing. That's what we learned in general, the whole picture. The end of the last paragraph that we learned in the last class was he explained that the idea that Malchus has nothing of its own, he's not talking about the Nekuda. He's not talking about this point, because this point is an entity. The entity, however, is one that absorbs. When it says Lesla Magok Moklum, we're talking about Malchus as a mashpia. Malchus in the world of emanation, of transmission. In the Binyan of Malchus, and that which Malchus, as it grows in its development, in its hashpah, there, Malchus doesn't have anything of its own. I just wanted to point out that in volume 1, in chapter, I think it's, let me just see, I think it's chapter 113. Maybe I'm wrong, one second. No, 113, yeah. In chapter 113, he also discussed this point. I just recalled it after last class. Actually began again on page 211, chapter 109, and specifically chapter 113. He also discussed this point about the Nekuda of Malchus. Okay, that sums up what we learned there. Then, the last thing we learned was the new paragraph on page 1360. So he explained like this, going back to the Ramaz, that the Ramaz, we learned earlier, and that was on top of page 1358, that the Nekuda Hashroshis of Malchus is called beautiful, it's called dark, but beautiful, because it has the capacity to stand side by side, face to face with Zah. So let's sum up what we learned. It was very dense, but very clear. I think I spelled it out very clearly. That in Priyetz Chaim and Shar Kavona says like this, that the Nekuda of Malchus at night descends by half a night, by midnight, into the Heichel Kodesh HaKadoshim, into the chamber of the Holy of Holies of Biy'a. Okay, it descends, that's where it is at night. And the morning, it arises and elevates to the chest of Zah and receives a trace, a reshimu, of the Mochin of Zah, which comes from the inner intellect and cognitive faculty, Mochin Pnimim, that came from the tefillah of the day before. And this becomes Mochin of the Nekuda of Malchus. And that's the Tefillin Shel Yad. We put on tefillin on the hand that corresponds to the heart, which is the chest of Zah. And the Malchus, and also the Tefillin Shel Rosh is the Rosh, the Mochin, that comes at the trace of the Mochin that it says Malchus is Tefillin Shel Rosh. Like it Halev the Zah, Tefillin Shel Rosh. And this is all still within the Nekuda of Malchus. And then during davening, v'nivnis acher kach b'tefillah. And we're prepared, and then Malchus gets built up afterwards in davening. That's what we learned. So what do we see here? The process, how from the Nekuda, the point of Malchus, how it elevates and slowly gets rebuilt. Or I should say, not rebuilt, but built. Remember that Malchus emanated just as a Nekuda for a reason, because it gives us a taste, an experience of what it means to be a total bittul and total absorption. That was the point. However, the goal is that Malchus shouldn't remain a point. It should grow, it should develop. It shouldn't remain a simple child or a simple that connects to the source, but that it should develop into a full-blown entity. So he's now going to go through that process, how that takes place. So he began with the Pri Etz Chaim, that at night it goes down, then it elevates to the chest of Zah, to the Midas, and with a trace of Mochin, Tefillin Shel Yad, Tefillin Shel Rosh. And then, during davening, we build Malchus into, like I spoke in the last class, explained the last lecture, like Moida Ani is Malchus. I wake up, and without any developed faculties, just acknowledge, thank you for returning my soul to me. During davening, and then Tefillin connects the Malchus to the Zah, first the chest, and also from the Mochin. And now we start building Malchus into a fuller entity through the rest of the prayer. So the Rebbe Rashab is now going to explain what that is. So let's learn inside. So he says like this now, V'yesh lemer, I'm reading around halfway down the page 1360, and the line begins V'yesh lemer. It's 7 lines from the top of the new paragraph on page 1360, and the pages can be found at ayinbeis.com if you're following along. It says, V'yesh lemer al pi ma shekosu b'makom acher. We can explain this, we could say, according to what is explained elsewhere, that Tefillin Shel Yad, shehein bebayis achas. So the difference between Tefillin Shel Yad and Tefillin Shel Rosh is that in the Tefillin Shel Yad, if you open up the box, it's one box that has all the parchment in it. In Tefillin Shel Rosh, when you open it up, it's actually four compartments, not one bayis echad. It's one bayis, it's one box, but in there's four batim. So that's bebayis achas. What is that? Why is that the case? Because shahainu hayediyah b'derech klolis adayin. Because in Tefillin Shel Yad, the idea, meaning the awareness of godliness, is in general terms. So it's one box, it's one general principle. Ubet Tefillin Shel Rosh, hein daled batim. There are 4 batim, like 4 homes or 4 compartments. Hu hayediyah b'bchinas pratis. Why 4? Because that breaks down to 4 different, like daled Mochin is called. The daled Mochin of Chesed, of Chachma Bina Daas, and Daas breaks into 2 parts. The Chesed and Gvura of Daas. But the point being is that the b'chinas pratis. It's an awareness that breaks down into details. Like he says in Zayar Va'era, the Pasha Va'era, page 25a, there he talks about V'yadaita, that the first in general, when you come to awareness and perception of God, first there has to be a general knowing that there's God, that there's a God in the world. The Iyu Shalit al Kula Ubara Alman. And this God, Shalit al Kula, he rules over everything, he governs over all the world, Adain Kala Elam, basically, Shalit al Kula Ubara Alman. And he created the creator of the world. So it's the idea, we're talking here in Va'era, he talks there in the Rai Mehemne, he talks about the mitzvah of Yediyah Salakus. So we know there's a mitzvah, not just to believe in God, but to know the Yadaita Hayyin, Daas Alakevicha. So they explain that this first begins with Yediyah Klolis, to know that there's God, and that God rules and governs the world and created the world. Like Bereshis Bara Lakim is Shemaim V'Sarts. Anechi Hashem Alakev. Okay. Va'achar kach, he says in there. Then afterwards, there needs to be tzarech liyas hayediyah b'derech prat. The mitzvah now also consists of, after you speak in general, that also yediyah, an awareness in detail. Lahavin ulahasaga inyan alaki, to understand and comprehend this divine, an inyan alaki, the divine element. So there's knowing the details of it. The way God creates, let's say, Bamala Kalalman, Sevav Kalalman. That's already the process of the details. Not just that God is created as the force of creation, but the details. And he explains, Uhu al derech, the difference between Klalus and Protis, which is Tefillin Shel Yad and Tefillin Shel Rosh, is al derech igulim v'yesher, shemavur b'lkutetera pasha shlach b'dibar hamaskul teva ha'aretz. So Igulim v'yesher, Igulim is a general knowledge that God, Igulim is like, it surrounds everything. It encompasses everything, I should say. Yesher is details. So Makif and Primi essentially is Igulim and Yesher. So the first idea is Makif, an overall knowledge. And the second level is Yesher, goes into the details. Kamay b'Kabbalah, Kabbalah's Eza Seichel. Like it is when we receive, when you first hear an idea, a student is learning and receiving an idea. So b'tchila mekabel saseichel b'derech klolos. In the beginning, the first thing is you receive and accept the idea in a general sense. Ve'ena mevenes ha'inyan lamed al kol chalkei ha'seichel v'asvoris. He doesn't understand in a way that he can contain, to be able to control, to own all the parts of the idea, all the components, and all its theories. It's a general idea without necessary understanding all the details. Then afterwards, Mizbeinen Ba'aseichel, he contemplates on the idea, V'yerid la'omkei, and he delves into it in depth, to the depth of the idea, and he plumbs, what they say, he plumbs the depths of the idea, shala inyan, of the idea, umasigai heitiv, and he understands it well, he comprehends it well. So in general, everything begins with first makif and then pnimi. First, you generally understand something, then you break it down and you really begin to appreciate and internalize the details. So this is also, he says now the difference, and he's going to go back now to Malchus and Aveda, difference in the Nekuda of Malchus in its first stage, Tefillin Shel Yad, where it goes up to the chest of Zah, and then Tefillin Shel Rosh. He says, Kamoy Kain Tefillin Shel Yad, Shein Mochin the Nukve, Hu HaYediyah B'Bchinas Klolos Adayim. It's Mochin of Nukve, because remember, Nukve, the Nekuda of Malchus, descended into Biy'a, then it elevates in the morning, and it goes all the way up to the chest of Zah, and there's a trace of the Mochin in it. And he said that is Tefillin Shel Yad. So he says, so that is Mochin of Nukve, who are Yediyah b'Bchinas Klolos Adayim. It's not really Mochin in its full intensity. It's only b'cholos that she'en ze yediyah v'asogah mamish. It's a sense of the idea. You can't call it yet a yediyah a perception and a full comprehension and literally an understanding of it. You haven't really mastered and fully understood it. The Tefillin Shel Rosh he Mochin the Zah. So Malchus, the Tefillin Shel Yad, is primarily Zah, but it has some Mochin, so it's the Mochin of Nukva. But then there's Mochin of Zah, that's Tefillin Shel Rosh. What that means that now you have an understanding in detail, which is called actual comprehension. You really comprehend the idea. So let's talk about a child and an adult. A child can understand an idea, but it's not close to someone who's more mature, who understands on a deeper and more detailed level. So let me just go back to see how it fits in here. So he says, okay, so good. Nasal Mochin of Nukve. That's Tefillin Shel Yad. Over Malchus. Still bothering me that expression of Malchus Tefillin Shel Rosh. Okay. And Tefillin Shel Rosh is Mochin of Zah. The idea bechinas asogir mamish. B'ayim asher kosa b'mokim acher. The gulim who al derech moshel the yurim alomim. The igulim is the left. The yurim is like is rooms. The yurim is like chambers. What's the yurim alomim? Closed chambers. I have to look up what that is. The yurim alumim. Alomim. Rab Shlomo, you know the expression the yurim alumim or alomim?
I am on the road and I don't have a safer in front of me, so.
Okay, we'll look it up. I'll look it up. I shall look it up. Fine. I'm actually looking at it right now. Let me see. I don't remember the idea. I remember learning about it. It's in my Morim, I see. It's not. I recall it's something. Okay. Yeah, it's a Medrash Rabbah. Let me just see. Give me a moment. I just want to look something up. Okay, it's a Medrash Rabbah in Bereshis. Says like this. He's speaking about I'll give you right away what he says here. 1 second. Mhm. So the discussion is on what means Yikovu Hamayim. When God said, gather the water, what's the word Yikovu mean? So he says like this. Let the water, he says, Yikovu Hamayim Mashani Osid Lasis Bom. Let the waters look forward to what I'm destined to do with them. And he gives an example. Moshe Melech Shabona Paltin Vaheshiba de Yurim Alomim. Yurim Ilmim. A king built a palace. My mistake. I said rooms. No. He placed there mute residents. The Yurim are residents. Mute residents in this palace. And every day they would arise and greet the king with gestures with their fingers and their kerchiefs, because they didn't speak. So they would greet the king just with the Mochin, with their gestures. So the king said, now these people are mutes, arise and greet me with gestures. How much more so they would do so, they were able to talk. So then the king went and he settled in this palace, residents who were able to talk. And instead of talking, what they did, they claimed the palace to be their own. It's not the king's palace, it's ours. So the king said, let the palace return to the way it was previously. So similarly, in the beginning, the praise of God came from the waters. I think the waters, that's what you cover. The waters praise God, but the waters don't speak. So God then created a human being who would speak, and saying that the human being should praise God. But then instead of praising God, the human being rose and defied God. And that's why God said, let us erase man and let the world go back to the way it was originally. And that's why there was the Mabul. The flood was essentially going back to when the waters praised God before the human being defied God. That's what he says. So basically, I don't know the relation to what we're learning here. I have to look it up in the Maimorim. But the Yurim Ilmim is talking about residents, mute residents. So my understanding is probably that he's referring to the Avodah of Yediyah Klolis. We don't have yet the details, which is when you speak it out in detail. The Yurim Ilmim is probably more a general way of understanding God, but not with words yet. That's what I'm assuming he means in this parentheses. That's Igulim. I'm going to look it up to understand the Medrash well, but that's where the word comes from. Interesting concept. But it's Medrash Rabbah. Yeah. If you want to look it up, Pasha Chavches Beis. Interesting, right? Okay. One more thing. Let me just see something. Okay. Yeah. Any questions? So far he's explained the difference between Tefillin Shel Yad and Tefillin Shel Rosh, which is in the building of Malchus, the difference between Mochin, Yediyah Klolus and Yediyah Pratis. Overall knowing, awareness, and the detailed one. That's so far what he said about Malchus through Tefillin Shel Rosh and Tefillin Shel Yad and Tefillin Shel Rosh. Bias Achas or Arba Batim, Dalad Batim. Okay, so let's continue. Uba Mochin Acher, Bedrush Tefillin, Mavur, and elsewhere. In the Maimer about Tefillin, I'm assuming it's the Siddur of the Mittler Rebbe about Tefillin. Mavur, the Tefillin Shel Yad hu haseichel v'hasoga sheba'elam. That Tefillin Shel Yad refers to the intelligence and the comprehension in the world. V'hainu b'chinas das Tachton. Seeing the world from the bottom up, Das Tachton means our perspective from below of understanding God through the prism and the lens of existence. Ubederech klal, and in general, that is the hasoge b'pchinas halakus hamislabish be'elam, like mamala kalam, the comprehension of the divine that manifests within the world, within existence. V'hu b'chinas mamala kalam, that's mamala kalam, godliness within existence. The Tefillin Shel Rosh, hu b'alakus shalamayla me'elamis. Tefillin Shel Rosh is the level of godliness that's beyond existence, transcendent. Ubchinas das Elyo, the perspective from above. So he's adding, before he said Tefillin Shel Yad is b'chalal, in general understanding something, and Tefillin Shel Rosh is the details. Now he's saying that one is Mamal Kalaman, the godliness as it relates to existence, and one is Sevav Kalaman, the godliness as is beyond existence. Das Elyo. Ba'ayim Mochin is boile il, and delve into what we've discussed or explained earlier. Dibra Maskal Atem Netzavim Hagimel. In the Maimah that's called Atem Netzavim, the third one in Ayin Beis, which is in volume 2, page 1134, ubadrushim sha'achreza, and the drushim that follow that. What did he say there? Chelik Beis, if I recall, he spoke about Das Elyon and Das Tachton, the ayin of the Yesh Hanivra and the ayin of the Yesh Amiti. Discussed that concept earlier. Okay. So, practically speaking, in relation to what we're learning now, there's Nekudas HaMalchus like Moida Ani. It's my example, he doesn't use it here. Where you're just acknowledging Haida Ba'alma, God, thank you for returning my soul to me. You don't even say God. You say Melech HaElam. You say Moida Ani L'Fnechem Melech Chayva, Moida Ani L'Fnechem Melech Chayva Kaim Shachzata B'Nishmas. Moida. Then there's Malchus as it elevates. So first there's Mochin of Malchus, of Nukve, which is like Tefillin Shel Yad. So it's primarily going through Midas of Zah. So Malchus is more than just, it's starting to comprehend, but it's in general, or is the divine that relates to existence. If you remember by Mutfamul, you relate to God because he sustains you. He gives you life. Hu chayecha. He blesses you with health, with sustenance, and so on. And then there's Tefillin Shel Rosh, is the next level, which is Mochin of Zah, that is connected to more detail, or the level of the divine that's beyond you, beyond existence. That's so far what he said. Let's continue and see how it develops. And any questions before I continue? I just don't want to get no one get lost here in the woods here. Okay,
Yeah,
so
to show the Tefillin Shel Rosh is of Zah, it's Mochin de Zah, and then it says that it's also a level of Soviv Ka'almi, right? Well, he did use the term Soviv Ka'almi, but I'd assume that's what he means when he says Mamaila Me'olamos.
Well,
How could it be both?
compared to Tefillin Shel Yad, Tefillin Shel Yad is Mochin of Nukva. He explained it's either in general, and Mochin of Zah is more detail, or Tefillin Shel Yad is Mochin that's connected more to Elikus as it relates to existence, and the Mochin of Zah is Elikus more beyond existence. Which, yes, he doesn't say Sefiros, but that's essentially the level. Daas Elyo.
So
It's
when
relative.
he says
about
it's
relative to Tefillin Shel Rosh, we're talking about Tefillin Shel Rosh in comparison to Tefillin Shel Yad. One corresponds to here, to the chest, Mochin of Nukva, and one corresponds here, is Mochin of Zah. So it's two different levels of understanding the divine. Relatively speaking, it's Mamala and Seviv, or Das Tachton, Das Elyon. Igulim and Yesher, yeah.
So you wouldn't say that Tefillin Shel Rosh is the pratim of Mamale Kolami.
I'm just saying what he says. He brought first general and details. We're there, and then he said, but Mokemacher, it explains that one is the divine relates to existence, and one is the divine that's beyond existence, like transcendent, like Das Elyon or Sefiros. He didn't. It's two ways to interpret it. Can they be reconciled? Yes, of course. One is general, and one is more details. He does, but it's, here right now it's like two different interpretations in what Tefillin Shel Rosh, Tefillin Shel Yad, and Tefillin Shel Rosh are. The context of we'll see where it goes regarding Malchus. We're going to find out. Okay.
Yes, thank you.
He doesn't call it details. It calls it. It's actually calls it like a higher level of understanding. Is Tefillin Shel Rosh. Omnom, however, now Binyan Malchus li yes b'pchinas partzuf lashpia lebiy'a. However, now the building of Malchus, not just an Akuda now, and not just even the way we just learned it, that it connects to Tefillin Shel Rosh and Tefillin Shel Yad, but it should become a patzuf, a structure, lashpia lebiy'a, to transmit to Biy'a. Because remember, Malchus, even though we learned that originally emanates as an Akuda, but ultimately you want Malchus to become like the moon that radiates, that illuminates. In this case, mashpia to Biy'a. As it's known, the primary creation of the worlds and the transmission of their vitality and energy is through Malchus. As a matter of fact, we learned earlier that from Zah alone, you can't create. It would be too intense. Existence could not come to being straight from Zah. He said that where? On page 1356. Yeah. Said it very, very explicitly. That's why it's a mashpia. Because at the end of the day, it's gilui, and gilui, even the lowest levels, is too intense. And you need to have Malchus should be the source of existence. So what do you see? Malchus has to become a mashpia. The Nakuda of Malchus is the exact antithesis of a mashpia. It's a makabel on its own, the Nakuda. Now we're talking about the binyan of Malchus to be a mashpia and to Biy'a, which is the primary source of existence, of the energy of existence. Yeah. This is what he said back in 1356. Being that the worlds are infinitely distant from the infinite divine light of godliness, that's why the worlds cannot be created straight from Eid Ein Sof. Not even from the 10 spheres of Atzilus, Shein B'chinas Hafroshes Ha'adam Eid Ein Sof HaMaitzel B'chinas Gilui HaHelam, because they're like an imparting of. Hafroshes, like imparting or emanating from. From the Eid Ein Sof HaMaitzel, the infinite divine emanator, in a form of Gilead Helam, because Atzilus is not Yesh Ma'ayin, it's Gilead Helam, it's revealing that which is concealed. Barihu b'chinas Gilead Eir, like we learned earlier. It's in a form of Gili. And the Gili, even when it gets diminished, it's still too intense to create existence. Rak mebchinas ha-Malchus. It's only from the level of Malchus. Shia Ora Levad. Because Malchus is just a reflection. In other words, from the sun alone, from the Shemesh of Zoh alone, you can't create. It's only through the reflection in Malchus. Like a melech, when you say someone's a king, you don't know anything about the king. You don't see his personality, his wisdom, his intelligence, his emotions. Just you only know he's the king. He's our king, which means that his inner energy is concealed. The only thing you know is he's our authority. He's our boss. He's the king. It's just the name and a reflection of the king himself. You don't know all the Giluyim and the revelations behind the king. Therefore, so now he's going back. So therefore, we need Malchus to be not just a Nakuda. That's how it originated. But the Malchus should be built into an entity. In order for the transmission and the extension of Malchus into Biy'a to create, you need Malchus to be built from the 9 spheres that's above it. That's Zoh. Like we learned Zoh and Mochin, that give Malchus the energy to be able to transmit. Remember, the Nakuda itself is more of a state of concealment. It's only absorbing. And Malchus does not have light of its own. Where's the Melech? The Malchus getting the energy to create Biy'a, and it's necessary because you can't bypass Malchus. So it's getting it from the 9 spheres that are in addition to Malchus. They're in addition to the root of the Nakuda of Malchus. Who that's nimshach in Malchus, the level of Ratzon, Chachma, and Midas. Now you could say, isn't Ratzon there already because of the Nakudas HaMalchus Keser? So you have to say he probably means a deeper level of Ratzon. But regardless, it's Chachma and Midas, you have the now Ukamayal Derech Moshel b'Melucha Lamata, like for example, a kingdom below. Melech al-Am, Medina. It's not just another be a king. The king has people
You're breaking up. You're breaking up.
Medina, on the country.
We missed the last 10 seconds. I mean, at least I did. I don't know if other people did, but
So I'll repeat it. So, for example, in a kingdom, you need that the king have a desire to be king on the nation and on the country. And without this rotzen, you can't have malucha. So just to be a nakuda that absorbs, like he said, the rotzen just to absorb from its source is not enough. Malchus also has to have the 9 spheres in order for it to become a melech on Biy'a and be mashpia to the next level. U'k'moy kain, just like there needs rotzen, tzarich liyas b'chinas hachachma u'midas chagas. It also needs wisdom and the emotions of chesed, gvura, teferes. So in other words, he's explaining now the other side of the coin, that after the nekuda of Malchus, you need Malchus to be built up to be able to be a mashpia into Biy'a, into Biy'a Yitzir Asiyah, like a kingdom. We you need the melech, that even though, yes, the melech is only a reflection, it's only ha'ara, because you can't have the full intensity, but you still need the king to be an entity that has a will and has wisdom and emotions that's relating to the people. If the king chooses just to be absorbing from his source, like the Nakuda Malchus we learned earlier, and just be encompassed in the source, he will not be a king for Biy'a. However, as we're learning, his energy does not come from himself, it comes from the 9 spheres above him. The Ima Yais, the Klolos Inyan HaMelucha, next page, 1361. And even though the general function and role of Malchus, of Melucha, of kingship, he ishtarus b'ritzene, ubo b'derech tziva v'gzeira bli tam, that he rules. Ishtarus means he rules. It's not that he is giving advice. He's ruling on an authority, and it comes in the form of a command, b'derech tzivui, v'gzeira, and a decree, bli tam. She just said that you need to have Mochin and Midas, which means there's intelligence in it. But the very Melucha itself is run by authority. Nevertheless, it's true. The very authority of Melucha is not bound to logic, meaning that you can reason with the king and decide that you want to argue with him because you have a different way of thinking. But nevertheless, even though the king is ruling with authority, but the governance is apitam b'seichel. We're talking about a normal melucha. The king runs the melucha with a logic, with a system. We're not just talking about an autocrat, a tyrant who just does whatever he wants. We're talking about something that's run with a proper systematic approach. So the melech has rotzen, chachma, Mochin, Midas, and so on. So now the Rebbe Rashab is going to the other side of it, that Malchus has to have all these elements in it for it to be able to transmit the divine energy from Atzilus into Biy'a. But he's going to talk more about these 2 aspects of Melucha, the authority part of it, and the logic, and the systematic, and the rational part of it. So it says like this: in general, these are 2 elements in kingship, in leadership. That's the richuk and the kiruv. That on one hand, the melech is beyond and distant from the people and subjects that he rules over. On the other hand, there's a certain commonality there. So he's not going to explain how Malchus has both elements. Because on one hand, it's closed because remember we said from Zah, from higher levels of Eid and Sof, you can't have creation. Malchus is a reflection, so it's closer to, but at the same time, it's still Malchus, which still remains above them. But let's not forget that the main place he's going to, he wants to explain how Malchus is now being built into a fuller entity, and that entity is what transmits. But the hashpah of Malchus is not coming from its own energy, it's coming from what it receives above. Ukiyadua, as it's known, the b'meluchi yesh beis inyanim. In kingship, in sovereignty, and leader, there are two elements. Ha'echad hashpah b'richu b'chinas remus v'isnasus. One is the transmission comes from a certain distance, meaning aloofness. Because he's in a state of an exalted, remus v'isnasus, an exalted and an uplifted state. The king is not like a teacher or a parent or even a colleague. A king is coming from a place, he's a king. He has a certain high, he's above the nations, above them, and he has an authority over them. Remus v'isnasus, exalted and uplifted, and through that there is the reverence of the king. Yiras HaMelech, it's a Meir Melech. There's a certain reverence and respect and awe of the king. The expression the pasuk says, the mitzvah, same time you shall appoint a king. What's the alecha? that his awesomeness, his fear should be upon you. In other words, you should be revere him. That comes from the fact that he's removed and exalted. If he was an equal, you don't have that expression. Ema is only in something that's beyond you. And that's what preserves the nation, the people, the empire. That's what allows the kingdom to run properly. That everybody reveres the king, or is afraid of the king, if you wish, but I don't like the word fear. So I use the word awe, and they abide by his will. I remember once hearing that there was a chassid, the Rebbe wanted him to go to a certain place on shlichus, and he didn't want to go. So the Rebbe gave him, by Simchas Torah, he gave him a bottle. Simchas Torah was Tafshin Chai, I believe, 1957. He gave him a bottle of mashke. I said, "This is for your shlichus," and he refused to take it. This was in public, so it was something. It was something, a sight. It was quite disturbing. And the Rebbe took the bottle and threw it to the floor. That's how disturbed the Rebbe was. Okay. For many years, the Rebbe ignored this chassid. Until years later, the Rebbe forgave him and said l'chaim to him. But the point is, his chaver, his name was Rapinya Altais. So Rapinya Altais said to him, to his friend, he said, the Rebbe doesn't have an army. He doesn't have money. He doesn't have any power. His only power is his words. People listen to him. If you don't listen to the Rebbe, it's like that's the only strength he has. It's like, so the Rebbe says to go, you got to go. So go there for a few weeks and then come back unofficially. But you can't defy the Rebbe in public, because with that, you undermine the very power. The Rebbe's only power is what he's asking people to do. I always was taken by that story. So a melech, the whole power of a king is there's authority. He doesn't have authority, and everyone can do whatever they like, he loses any power. So what he's saying here is that's the Kiyum Medina Shakol Yirei Ma'amel V'Nishmar L'Ritzene. So that's more like Richuk. That's not, I'm not your friend. The king is not the friend that's giving you advice and saying, hey, please do this, do that. There's a certain authoritative element to it. And that's the primary control, the primary ruling and governing. That he rules over them with his will. His will, what he says, what the king's will is our command. That's the Richuk. Beis, on the other hand, there's another side to Malchus. That the transmission comes a certain element of intimacy, a closeness. What does that mean? Shamelech ma'ayin umefakeach b'inyane hamedina. The king looks deeply into. He's not just aloof in an ivory tower. Ma'ayin means he delves into and researches and looks and probes. Umefakeach and probes b'inyane hamedina, in the matters of the empire, of the nation, lanhigam benachas, to govern them benachas, in a pleasant way, ulamali kol machseram, and to fulfill all their needs, ulases chukim l'tevas hamedina, and to establish laws for the good of the people, of the nation, of the empire. So it's not just he's sending orders from above. That would be only Richuk. It's an authority. So on one hand, there's a melech as an authority, which is what preserves order and discipline and so on. Because if you don't have authority, there's no accountability. Basically, then there's no law and order. On the other hand, he gets involved and engages with the details, what is good and right for the country, for the people, in order for that to govern them properly. And he says clearly, benachas, pleasantness. Dashpa zu hi al pi chochma midas. This transmission is not just coming from a place of that's what he wants. It's coming with wisdom and with empathy and with feelings. So therefore, Malchus can't just be an authority. Malchus has to have all the Sefiros. It has to have Chabad and Chagas and so on. This is as a king below. So too in kingship above, meaning by Malchus Lamaila, shetzorich is hamshochas harotzen, lias bechinas hamelucha v'isnasas al elemis v'nevroyim. You have to have the desire, the will of God, of rotzen, in order to have the king in melucha. So hamshochas harotzen, lias bechinas hamelucha, in order for there to be kingship. The isnasus and exaltedness over the worlds and creations, that the king dresses in a garment of Geus, which is exaltedness. He dresses in robes that are kingly robes, which evoke an element that he's exalted and above and beyond the people, the subjects. I just want to see where he talks about the point number 2. Yeah. So he's now going to elaborate on these 2 points in Malchus itself, explaining how the Binyan Malchus is necessary and how you run and how existence is going to come into being. So right now he's talking more the distant part, the isnasus. And isnasus be'etzem min samachus l'mayla b'chinas atzilus. This is b'chinas isnasus alemes. Yeah. So from his isnasus be'etzem, from his very fundamental nature of being exalted, of malchus l'mayla b'chinas atzilus. So from there, I'm skipping the parenthesis. That exaltedness should now transmit that he's exalted and above the worlds. In the parentheses, the Rebbe Rashab adds, Adam. So we find by a person is also that way. Every person has a certain sense of uniqueness, of specialness. We feel special. We feel a certain element of superiority, if you wish. But there, it's actually like a self-confidence, a self-esteem. But then it's in a state of Helem. It's not expressed. It's just a feeling of an inner feeling of that you have something unique about you. That's something special about you. So too the supernal man in Atzilus has an element that is fundamentally above and beyond anything the lower worlds. That's the general Nekudas HaMalchus now. But we want that not to remain just a fundamental state. We want that to be expressed. That should actually be expressed in a real practical way. That God is the master of the world. That rules it, b'terem kol yitzur nivra, before everything was shaped and created, before the creation was shaped. So first he's in that state that he is exalted on his own, even without anything else there. He's in a fundamental state of being of a certain unique, special quality, unique state, even without relating to anyone else. So Ozai Melech Shmoi Nikral Am Nifrid. And the time when he desires, and then the Adain Olam continues, and the time comes that he desires, so everything desires in order to create the worlds. Then it's not just exalted on his own, but he becomes his name, the king. He becomes the king of these people, on a nation that's separate from him. So we're not talking about how he is in his own inner self. We're talking now how he relates. So a person could have a kingly, dignified spirit, but he's not necessarily a king yet. And that's the second level, and we've learned this at length earlier, that he's misnasa, not merumim levade on his own, but he misnasi miyamei selam. That's the expression that he's exalted from yamei selam, from the days of the world, meaning from existence. Va'alzeh hu hamshachas harotzen mebchinas keser elyon. This is the hamshacha of rotzen, from keser elyon, from the supernal keser, lias harotzen bisnas zeis, that there should be a rotzen in this being exalted state. V'zeh b'chinas keser malchus, the keser elyon, iu keser malchus, v'ayna rotzen l'menucha. Okay, let me just explain before we get confused here. Remember, we learned before that Nekudas HaMalchus is Keser. And what was the Keser? He said the Rotzen of Malchus to be absorbed and encompassed in its source. Here he's saying is the Rotzen L'Melucha. So he's going to explain that there's two separate things here. There's the Keser and the Nekudas HaMalchus, and then there's the building of Keser when you build up Malchus into becoming an actual king. A king over others. That's already the Malchus as it relates to existence, which is where you need binyan Malchus, not the Nekudas HaShrosha. We're not talking about the root now. We're talking about Malchus as it's being mashpia to Biy'a. So the Rebbe Rashab is explaining, just as we had before, that the Melech on one hand needs to have a certain element of authority and rotzen, but he needs to have a desire to be a Melech. And then he needs Chacham and Midas, which is the other spheres. So he's explaining the same thing above. So the first thing is that you need Hamshachas HaRotzen, that he should remove, from being an exalted state, he should want to be exalted over a nation, over people. That's Asnasis Be'etzem, not Ma'alim Atzilus, right? Should then become Malchus of Biy'a. Malchus should become Keser of Biy'a. So he says, so that now becomes a keser on the Melech Ama Nifrid, and this is where you have to draw down from Malchus, from Keser Elyon, which is the Rotzen, the Yesad Rotzen. There should be a desire, in this exalted state. That's what we mean, Keser Malchus, the crown of Malchus. Like the Lashon we say in Tikkun Ezeyer, the Keser, you Keser Malchus. The higher Keser is the Keser of Malchus. B'hainu harotzen lemelucha. The desire Keser, the desire lemelucha for Melech to be king. Ulechein tzrichim livnes gam b'chinas haKeser. That's why we have to also build up Keser. Remember, before we said the Nekuda of Malchus is not binyan Malchus. That's just the Nekuda. But Keser has to be built. The Hagam Keser Malchus b'seit shedish. Even though we said earlier it's b'seit shedish, it's there and it's in intrinsic root of Malchus. You have Keser already. But now we need something else. We need to build out that Keser. Achzeu b'bchinas isnasus atzmi. V'hu b'chinas aliyah v'iskalus l'mayla kanal. That on the root level is Keser atzmi. Sorry, snasus atzmi. The fundamental state, the Malchus as it is in its root. And that's the Aliyah, it elevates and gets encompassed above. We need now the Hamshacha of Keser Malchus, that it should transmit downward, not upward. That's the binyan of Malchus, where we are now drawing down the rotzen. There should be that this malucha shouldn't remain above, it should come down below and be a melech over Biy'a and be mashpi'in to Biy'a. Omnom,
Kudash Shoshis.
the Nekudash Roshis is Aliyah V'Iskalus. We're talking now the B'sei Tesvis, the binyan HaMalchus. The Nekudash Roshis on its own is a Snasis Atzmi that could remain on its own, will remain removed from Biy'a. It will never connect to, it'll be a melech that's not connected to the Am. It's Malchus as it is in its root, as it's being absorbing its higher levels. We're talking about binyan HaMalchus. This is like Malchus without Rosh Hashanah. You need Tamlichuni Aleichem. So that's what you need binyan HaMalchus. That's already the Giluyim of being binyan of Kesed within Malchus. That's what it is. So there's a snasus atzmi of a king even when he's not a king. The Rebbe did not want to be Rebbe. If he's remained that way, then he'd still be within his personality. He has a Rebbe's Malchusdik attitude. But these are rotzen that he should actually want to interact and connect with the Meluch, with the Am. That's what we're talking about now. Not what he is in his inner personality. But this is still Richuk. Omnam zel b'chinas hashpah b'richuk de b'chinas Malchus. This is Richuk because it's coming, it's a rotzen lemelucha, but it's a rotzen. V'hainu b'chinas remus v'isnasus ha-melucha. So it's true, he's now moved to the nation, but he's still in the state of remus. He's still exalted and uplift and loftier and elevated from Lias b'chinas isnasus salam, to be exalted over the nation. We learned before about the ayin within ani. Ani is I. The ayin is a state of bittul within the ani. So I have to look it up, but I think that was what he called it snasus because it's still a state of ayin, not real ani, if I recall correctly. V'ashpa b'kiruv, and the transmission closely, in a close manner, the Malchus, him b'chinas chachma midas the Malchus. So the binyan of Malchus continues. You need now the chachma, the wisdom, and the midas of Malchus to run the kingdom with intelligence, with empathy, with feelings. And that's more than just the ratzon l'melucha. Like we say, b'asara dvarim, with 10 things God created the world. B'chachma, b'tfuna, b'daas, b'kayach, shehein eses Sefiros sheba Malchus. Those 10 things are 10 elements that God uses to create existence. The 10 spheres within Malchus. He shaped, he created, crafted the human being with wisdom. So you see, not just Ratzon. Ratzon is authority, is exaltedness, but with Chochmah. Ubemedesh Rabba Pasuk Hu. Oscha v'yichenenecha. Hu ubezdin nimnu al kol ever ve'ever shalcha.
Hu oscha v'yichenenecha.
That's what I just said. Hu oscha v'yichenenecha. That he made you and he formed you. So he says, what is that referring to? What's the hu oscha v'yichenenecha? He says, hu bezdin, the Eberstein, his tribunal, and his bezdin nimnu al kol ever shalcha. They decided and determined on each aver and aver. It means the details and each limb of yours. Sifyu Gimel, and Me'er, which is from Meir Papirash, the Kabbalistic encyclopedia. Eisei Sifyu Gimel, Kasev Hu Ubezdin Hu Bina Ubezdin Zun. Hu is Bina, the level of Bina, and Bezdin is the level of Zohar Malchus. So you see here, all the Sefiros are being invested in and being immersed within Malchus in order to create. The Medeshava Breshis Pashir Beis Isa Kodesh Baruch Hu Bezdin. Not sure. I have to look up what he means by that.
Instead of who, it said Kodesh Baruch Hu, not who.
Yeah,
basically.
probably right. Correct. And these are the instruments, so to speak. This is the way the Etzem Esav is the very core of creation. This is the Etzem Esavus, u'kamoy kain, ba'ir v'achayeshe be'elamis. Just as it is with the very creation of existence that it goes through all these 10 spheres, same thing, the energy and vitality in the worlds, hakol ma'eses spheres de Malchus. It's all being channeled through the 10 spheres of Malchus, which is not the Kudash Roshes of Malchus. This is already the Binyan of Malchus. The Chochma v'seichel ba'odel lamato mebchinas Chochma sheba Malchus. That wisdom and intelligence in the person below, how does it get to the person? It comes from Chochma sheba Malchus. It originates in Chochma v'atzilus. But from Chochma v'atzilus, it goes through Chochma sheba Malchus, v'ahergesh aliki ba'adam. And the feeling, the divine feeling we have for God in the human being, whom b'chinas hamidis, u'kamoshin is barely ill. As was explained earlier, that all the spheres of Atzilus allow us, begin the shtamud, allow us to have a understanding and a feeling in godliness. Ve'hein hates spheres the Malchus, these are the 9 spheres in Malchus, sheyiredes lebiyah, that descend into Bri, Yitzir, and Asiyah, b'chinas er v'chayes be'elamis. The energy and vitality of the worlds, ubinyan hamalchus b'tesfiris huma esesfiris dezah. And how does this building of Malchus, with its 9 spheres, meaning addition to its Nakuda of Malchus, where does that originate from? Not on its own. That comes from the 10 spheres within Zah. So the Rebbe Rashab now explains the second part of Malchus, what happens when it develops. First, we spoke about the Nakuda of Malchus as it's rooted in the Nakuda Atzmis of Atzmus Ein Sof, that's higher than Gili. And that is Malchus, is a complete state of absorption. I did the Torah Lemivla, completely absorbing and connected. Even the Keser Malchus, the Keser, the Nakuda is all about being absorbed. But then you need another half, Malchus, to come downward. So first he explained through Tefillin, based on the Priyat Chaim, how Malchus begins, the Nakuda, begins to elevate, first to the chest, Tefillin Shel Yad, then Tefillin Shel Rosh, which is either from the klolis, the general contemplation, to the detail, or from a malaklam to sevav klam, from the immanent, the divine within existence, to the transcendent. But then he said, Omnam, the true building of Malchus is not just Malchus going back up to Atzilus and beginning to receive Zon and Mochin, but that Malchus should go into Biy'a. And for that, Malchus has to be built into a full-blown entity that is not just an absorber, that Malchus is channeling Oyer. What Oyer? The 10 spheres of Zah, which include everything from Keser, from the Ratzon for kingship, but now a Ratzon, not the Ratzon of Malchus to go upward, the Ratzon for him to be king, to actually be a king over Biy'a, and then that's B'derech Richuk, the authority of the king. But then the governance itself comes through Tam and Seichel, through intelligence, that it comes into the details of Chachma, Bina, and Malchus, and Mides, both in the very process of creation, as well as the vitality and energy within creation, the wisdom and the feelings we have below in the divine, all channeled to us through the 10 spheres that built up Malchus, which comes from the 10 spheres within Zah. Now remember, Zah itself was also built, because Zah begins as 6 facets. That's the Zayin Tachtonus. But Zah also has the Gimel Mochin that come through it. So now, through Zah, both parts of Zah, Malchus gets all the 10 spheres, and there you have the full-blown Malchus is able to function as a king, running an empire, running a nation. with all that he spoke about, both the authority, the Ratzon, and also the details of, and also the actual intelligence and emotions necessary in running a proper empire. And the same thing is Malchus above, which is all this is emotional to explain how Malchus of Atzilus works. That's essentially what he said so far. So let's stop if anybody wants to ask anything.
And this is actually, besides going down to a level that was there of Biy'a, but this is also the creation of Biy'a, this whole business that we're talking about.
Both the creation and the governance.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
But all of this, the two explanations, the Richuk and the Kiruv, this is all nothing to do with the Nekuda Shorshis, right? This is already, even
This
the
is the
Richuk has to do
the
already.
Binyan Hama.
I don't
Can
hear
hear
you.
you. Yeah,
I
we
think
didn't hear you.
himself. I think he's talking to someone in his house.
Yeah. Yeah, there's the Nekudash Rosh is Beseid Sherish. That he explained is all about absorption. Then there's the Binyan Malchus. That's like the king, so to speak, on his own, in his own world, in his own domain. And he's not a king over anyone. That's how he himself is in his core root. But that's complete absorption. Then there's Binyan Malchus. The Malchus to be able to be a king over a nation requires that he should want it and that he should use his intelligence and emotions to govern the nation and the empire and the subjects. And that's the Binyan Malchus he's talking about now.
So even the Richuk is part of the Binyan Malchus, right? Even
the
the
Richuk and Kiruv is all in the second, in the Binyan Malchus. Keser and the other spheres. So Richuk and Kiruv has nothing to do with the Nekuda Ashrashis. Nekuda Ashrashis is not in a state of Amshach, it's in a state of complete Aliyah V'Skaulus.
Is it fair to say that the Nekuda Hashrashis is sort of what, even though it's not involved in actually reigning, if you will, over Biy'a and being the makor of what comes down into Biy'a, nevertheless, it's kind of essential to that process indirectly, because that's the essence of bittul. And so in order for the proper divine energies to flow purely through, with essentially a dose of bittul, the pure divine energy, that in some sense it's
Maybe
necessary, it's connected.
He doesn't say anything about that, so I don't know. Can't answer the question.
Do you understand my question though?
Yeah, and I'm saying I can't answer the question because he doesn't indicate or say anything about it, at least not till now. He doesn't say anything about it, so
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Uh-huh.
That's what you said, Rabbi Yitzchok. Bittul, I hear what Rabbi Simon said, he doesn't say, but I think the whole point of Nekuda Shorshis is...
I didn't say it's wrong, by the way. I didn't say it's wrong. I just said I can't comment because I don't see anything in the Maimer here that indicates one way or the other. But it's possible. I mean, it really comes down to analyzing. It really comes down to analyzing
whole
Terem Kol. It's but this Nasus Atzmis. It sounds like this Nasus Atzmis on his own is the Nekudis. He said that in the parentheses. That he says, so he says, they'll close B'chinas Nekudis HaMalchus. Nasus Be'etzem. So that end of the parentheses, and based on what we learned earlier, you could say that it all starts, I mean, God on his own is definitely exalted and beyond anything. But he hasn't yet chosen to relate that, his nasus, to a nation, to people, to others. So the Nekudis HaMalchus is definitely connected to its source in that sense. But whether that is going to compel the Binyan HaMalchus, that's a question that can be asked. Maybe you need an outside force. I think we're going to learn about this when we learned about, remember that Malchus has nothing of its own and it gets it either from Zah or from the Neshama Veda of Neshamas. So maybe connected to that. What is the catalyst that actually causes that from the Nakuda of Malchus should come the Binyan on Malchus? And that catalyst could very well comes from the Emel B'Layam, is the people through their Aveda that does that. So then you would have to say that this Nasus Atzmi was not enough to do that, even though the first time when God created existence, he did it, Allah's Ma Minei Bey, he did choose to do it himself. But generally speaking, I think this is going to be a discussion a little later of essentially how do you get from the Nekudas HaMalchus to Binyan HaMalchus. In other words, what does cause Malchus, which on its own is a Nekuda, to actually be built up? Daddy did not explain what builds Malchus yet. What causes the building? We know that it comes from the 10 spheres of Zah, but now the question is, what causes it to actually be built? So that's something I think we can discuss later a little.
In a similar vein,
Right. But it cannot happen without the Isnasus Atzmis. The whole entire Amshocher, if there would be no Isnasus Atzmis, it would definitely not happen Biy'a. The Isnasus Atzmis contains the whole entire Helam Atzmi. And this could bring it down to Biy'a. You have the whole entire picture, but so you don't. This is an Nekuda.
I'm not denying that. Obviously, when you say in the Arizal that Malchus is Netzola B'Seit Shedish in the Kuda, and then B'Seit Tesvus, so obviously you don't have a root, you don't have a Tesvus. You first have to have a root nucleus and a root core before you add on. So there's no question that Malchus begins with the Nekudas HaMalchus. That's not a question. The question is the process of how it moves from one to the next. So yes, there's the Nekudas HaMalchus is a Nekuda Shroshis, which is, like he said, rooted in Helam Atzmi, and is a fundamental makabel because it's an absorber. He said it's not even less lemagamal klum because it is an entity. The less lemagamal klum is when Malchus starts becoming a mashpia, and you start building Malchus. So if that answers the question, okay, fine.
in a similar vein, I've been wondering.
I'm saying if that answers Yitzchak's question, then fine. I don't know what more. I don't know. I think we're going to have to learn more to see what exactly generates it. What's the trigger, so to speak?
I was speaking about it more in the form of enabling it, facilitating it, not necessarily triggering it.
Okay, so I don't know about that. I need to see more before I want to comment on that because he hasn't said anything that, except the Hasnasus Atzmi part. You know, obviously, if there's no Hasnasus Atzmi, there's not going to be Hasnasus Ala Zulas on another. That's correct. I mean, that's that. You know, you can't be a king over others if you don't have kingship within yourself, without others.
Can I ask?
But I think I was saying. So go ahead, Tzvi. Go ahead, Tzvi.
No, I just for clarification and I don't know. Can you fit in the muscle with an artist to this whole thing?
Well, you could fit it in only one sense that there's a state of godliness that's higher than being an artist. I don't know if that's what you're referring to. Hisnasus Atzmi and Hisnasus Alazulas is a theme that we learned earlier, even in volume 3. Hisnasus Atzmi, remember, Hoid V'Hodar, I think, was the difference, is a level where he doesn't need anyone to be an exalted entity. It's not relative. It's not like, oh, when there's a nation, so I'm the leader of the nation. Leadership is an inherent quality, even if there's no one to lead over. Because it's just a person who's have an exalted element to them. Like he said about human being. A human being has a certain element, but it's behelim. It's like even he himself may not even be aware of it, like we learned. Snasus al, like he says, Adein Elam, b'terem sur, b'terem kol yitzur nivra. He's already a king before anything was created. That's how he is fundamentally. But that's in his own inner sanctum. Then, like for Rosh Hashanah is coming, you need him to, you want him to be our king. Not that God is just king, that he has a kingly personality, so to speak. That's one thing. That sounds like the Nekudas HaMalchus is a Snasus Asmi. Sounds like it. Even though I'm not so clear about that as well, because till now we've spoken more than Nekuda as being an absorber, where Malchus senses that it wants to be encompassed in its source. Wasn't really focusing on his Snasus. But that's another discussion which I don't want to go into right now. But even according to the parentheses, that Nasasus be'etzem zel close Nekudas HaMalchus Hanal. So fine, that would say the Nekuda. But then there's the king as he is true. That's why you need 10 spheres. That you need Binyan HaMalchus, because you need the king to choose and want to be king over the people. That's a whole other step process. So it's true. If he's not a king within himself, if God was not kingly, not going to be a king over the people. So in that sense, correct. But go on. I see Eliezer wants to say, Svi, everybody. I don't know how to bring it to the artist because I'm not sure what aspect of the artist you want to address here.
It tells because his Nasus doesn't really fit in that much with the
Right.
artist.
Nasus is right because the artist is already saying he's an artist over the art, or he has aspects to him that's being beyond artist. It's a little different discussion. Yeah. Okay. Anyone can speak. It's fine.
Yeah, in a similar vein, to what you were saying is that we're hopefully going to learn what the catalyst is. So you said to cause the Nekudas of Malchus to want to be Biy'a Malchus, or become Biy'a Malchus, or to hashpa. My question was this whole time was, if we say that Nekudas of Malchus is tachas a bittel and only an absorber, where does his nasus atzmi come in there? That he wants to be elevated.
I just said that.
Elevated,
that's why
elevated into Klala and elevated to Kesser and elevated to higher levels. Where's this want? Well, this ratzon is already is not tachas a bittel. Bittel is just absorbing. I don't want anything. I just want to accept, receive. I have no interest in being included or elevated, or I don't even.
First of all, you're misunderstanding Hisnasus Atzmis. Hisnasus Atzmis is not a desire. Hisnasus Atzmis is a state of being, something that's just kingly in nature. So we're not talking about a rotzen here now. So Hisnasus Atzmi, you could apply to the Nekuda simply because that's its state. Its state is, it's a sense, it's not a contradiction to being absorption. That's what I qualify. That's why I said this point that it's Hisnasus Atzmi is not what he really discussed earlier. Earlier he was discussing total absorption. That is completely, the words he used was, what was the words he used? One second. Yeah, it's a state of darkness. It doesn't. It's all about what he's receiving for himself. He didn't connect it before this Nasus Atzmi. I'm just saying you could explain it, but that's another discussion. What he's discussing here is how he actually wants to be a king. And that's his Nasus Alazulas over another.
But I'm still trying to difficult how you could have tachas a bittel, and at the same time he have, even if there's no ratzon to elevate, say forget ratzon, but how could you have total bittel, which is you have nothing, absolutely nothing, you're just totally absorption, at the same time have this unique aspect, even if it's intrinsic and doesn't have any desires? How could you have something else in you if you're just
there is nothing else? It's a state of being. You don't have anything else, and you just are that way. A person who has a leadership quality is just created with a certain level of dignity. That's all it is. It's a level of dignity that comes because you are connected to your source. That's how I would explain it.
I was just going to say, I wanted to give a mashal, if I may, that
you're connected to your source. Listen, Malchus is connected completely with its source. It's absorbing it. And that makes it in a state of, that's why it's called Malchus. It's a state of dignity, it's not about what will, it's not a personality, it's what it is.
I wanted to give the mashal of you as a chazer. Like you said, when you were doing chazara, you had to be completely bittul. You just had to turn off your mind. You couldn't process. You just absorbed that. So that's for at least in your situation. That's your situation, a great example of bittul. And once you did that and you listened for however many hours, right? Then got back to the office and you sat down, and it poured out and it poured out and it poured out and it poured out. And then you had to use all of your faculties, your intellect, probably even your emotion, etc., and all your body, everything you had to use to make it come out like a faucet. But it wouldn't have been possible without the bittul. So that's
not
why.
my question. That's not my question, though, Yitzhak. My question is not the second part, which is hashpa. My question is,
right. He's not asking about hashpa.
I'm
No,
not asking
your
about
example is good. Yitzchak, your example is good regarding the two-step process that he's discussing here.
That was my question.
Yeah, but that's not my question. It's not my question, though.
Eliezer, about what you said.
Okay, fine. Listen, what's that? We could talk about different aspects here. What you're saying, Yitzchak, is clearly understood. There's a state where Malchus is complete absorber. There's a state that it becomes a hashpah through the binyan. The question is, obviously, if you don't absorb, you can't be mashpia. That we understand as well, because what are you being mashpia exactly? But here the discussion is not so much what you're being mashpia; it's the forces that are causing you to be mashpia. And there, Malchus, the bitla alone, if you just remain in the state of a chayzer, if you want to use that example, you'll never be mashpia. I could have also been a chayzer that just left the farbrengen and never wrote anything down and never communicated to anyone. Right. I absorbed and remained there. That would be Nekudas Malchus that remains as a Nekudah. See what I'm saying?
But you have to.
It would already been built up though, because it wouldn't hashpa into Biy'a, but it would still have all the chachma from the Rebbe in you and Bina. So you wouldn't.
Yeah, but my being would just simply be. I'd be like a spark inside of another entity. It wouldn't. There would be nothing coming from me to anyone else.
Maybe the activation is coming from what's mashpia into Malchus. So you're connected to your Rebbe. That's like on parallel, being connected with the Eibusher. Lahavdil, okay, just for a second. But once you're connected,
the question here is about isnasus.
Yes.
We're not talking about the process of Malchus being bottle and first absorbing and then being mashpia. I think everyone understands that makes total sense.
I think that
stages,
a very important idea, that Malchus is also a moyer, shnei me'oris hagdolim. The way of Malchus is bitul, the helem ha'atzmi, but bitul only in the sense that it's not feeling itself, but it is a moyer. It is beferush a moyer. The bitul is in order to mashpia. How could the mashpia going only to the bitul? But it's not only bitul that thinks only about itself to be bottle. The bitul is to have the ashpoah. Otherwise, the mashpia would not be able to be mashpia without the bitul. But it's not a bitul for the purpose of bitul. It's a moyer. The moon is also a moyer. Shnei moyer is agdelim. That's what I think. That should answer Eliezer's question.
I don't know if it answers his question, but look, I think what everybody's saying has legitimacy. I think we're just conflating a bunch of different things. We just have to separate what we're talking about now.
And concentrating the bitul for itself.
I mean, everybody here, listen, we're all talking top. Everybody's saying good things. The question is different points here. There's different points to one big topic here. We're not all talking about the same thing here right now.
And I'll add another topic here. Maybe you don't want to deal with it now. What is this who based in? What is this based in? That God creates us and creates the world. I know it's like he took Eitzah from the Bereshis, but the based in are the Sefirot, right? The Rebbe says they're the Sefirot, but they're not the tools of the artist. I mean, him and his based in created us. His based in at the end threw me off a little. But you couldn't.
The Simon said he didn't understand that at the point he's going to go over it.
Nimnu, based in Nimnu, I'll call it Ava ve'Ava Shalach.
It's first of all the medrash. It's not Ayin Beis. The medrash. It's essentially that God created such shtalshelus, and He uses His shtalshelus in a way. Those are His instruments. So Bezdin is part of God's instruments. Does that make more sense to you?
Yeah, it's not Malachim, right? It's just the Sefiros. It's the Sefiros.
Well, Malachim are also extension of the Sefiros, just on a lower level. So they're also creations. Even if God consults with the Malachim, they're also part of His system. basically it's saying that it's part of the system of God. It's not just God doing it unilaterally from before the Tzimtzum, it's God doing it after the Tzimtzum through the system he created.
Okay, because the term based in to me implies some inherent intrinsic consciousness on the part of the based in themselves. They're not just an instrument. They're a based in shows that they have intellectual capacity and they can make decisions themselves.
Well, listen, he says business Biy'a, Zah, and Malchus.
Right,
He
so
said that explicitly. So
right. So that's not an independent
you mean to
sort of
say
like,
it's not the Bezdin of Crown Heights? No, it's not
right.
the Badatz of Crown Heights.
Exactly. I don't even know if we have a Badatz yet. We still only have one, maybe two rabbis, right? But we don't have three.
I think that who is also part of the Sefiros. It's not talking about the Helem Atzmi. And that's why the Medrash is saying HaKodesh Baruch Hu. It's
Well,
a
who
lot.
he says is Biy'a. Yeah, who is Biy'a? Yeah.
Who is Bina? No, based in it. Oh, it was who Bina?
Who is Biy'a? Bezdin is Zah Malchus.
Zal Malchus.
So okay, so we have our
All right.
questions answered. Where are we holding it?
Well, I think we'll just keep learning. Maybe the Rebbe will answer this.
We go back to that parentheses.
There's no question. It's Nasus Atzmi.
Did you go back to
Kudus Malchus? That's for sure.
There's
The
no
main
question
thing to
that
keep
what?
in mind. There's no question. The Kudus Malchus that he spoke before, which is Aliyah V'Iskalus, he's definitely connecting to Nasus Atzmis. He said that. He says that explicitly twice, actually. If I look clearly here, or once at least. Yeah, he says it twice actually. Fine. But the main thing to keep in mind here is there's two separate elements in Malchus. What it is in its root, and what it is by extension as it becomes a mashpia. In its root, all it is an absorber and a makabel. In its hashpah, as it transmits and becomes a melech, an actual king over Biy'a, there it needs to be built up to do that. It needs keser, it needs Mochin, midas. That's the key thing he wants to say here. And that is also not coming from Malchus itself. That's coming from Zah, which is why it says less lemegam al klum, that Malchus have nothing on its own. But absolutely right, we're middle of the topic. He's not finished at all.
Yeah, the Kesser Gaz is the Ratzon from the highest levels. And by the way, did we also go over that parenthesis that we skipped? I wasn't sure.
I went over the
Yes.
I went through all the parentheses.
Yeah.
Okay. Sometimes I lose my place.
The Inyan of Hisnasis Atzmi and its connection to the Nekudas Malchus, we talked about this being connected to Helem Atzmi, which is, we essentially talked about almost as high as anything from this lower world can get to Atzmis. It's not Atzmis, it's very close. So the Inyan is, if you're connected to that high of a level of Elikus, then you're necessarily ennobled. You're dignified. You're ennobled. So once you feel that connection, that itself makes you feel like you have the capacity to reign over what's below you, because you're ennobled. Like when you're that close to the king, it necessarily dignifies you.
I would argue otherwise.
No,
the Maimorim speak otherwise.
Yes.
That's the other Maimorim actually speak very differently than what you just said. Hisnasus Asmi does not necessarily compel Hisnasus on another, because you don't need anything. You don't need it. There's no reason. It's true to say that a real king can't be king unless he has Hisnasus Atzmi. But to say Hisnasus Atzmi compels Hisnasus Alazulas, you could argue not necessarily. But I will say this. This was discussed earlier at length, and I have to go back to really look at it because I don't remember all the details. But it could very well be that because God has a Hisnasus Atzmis, that is what drove, in a way, that he should want to have a Hisnasus Al Ha'am. So I'm not denying that one leads to the next. But you're speaking about it more almost in a human level, that if a person has leadership quality, fundamentally, he's going to want to actually be a leader at some point. Either yes or no.
But you also mentioned before that he wanted to give chesed, and that was the whole prime reason for everything. So that's also combined with his Nasus Atzmi.
That's why we have to go back. Listen, we have to. I don't want to say more than what it says in the Maimer here, unless we find that it actually in earlier Maimorim or later. That's why I said, let's stick to what he says. And things that are not 100%, we'll either clarify as we go along or we go back. If you want to look up Isnasas Atzmi and Isnasa Lazulas earlier, you can definitely do that and see what says more. Because here there's too little to really, it's also not the point he wants to make here. It's not at all where he's going here. He wants to speak about two stages of Malchus here. So far, he hasn't yet made a connection how necessarily one leads or doesn't lead to the other. But there's no question one leads to the other. The question is the process and exactly how it works. I would go back to see what it says earlier before coming to any total definitive definition here. He does say here, Midas says Nasas be'etzem ba'adam rak mitzatru adam rak shebchinas helam bli ispashtus klal. That's Isnasas be'etzem. And then you need it to become Isnasas ala elamis. And that's why L'chein tzrichim livnei is gam b'chinas hakesev. Because even though there is Isnasas b'seid shedish, seid asnasas asmim, Mashachim b'chinas hakesev malchu, harotz elias is galos hamalucha. Yeah, he just says that one brings to the next. But the more details, I would look into what we learned earlier. I don't remember where it was earlier in this volume. But if we find that, it would definitely help if you want to really understand the whole dynamic here.
The bottom line is that even by the Helam Atzmi, in the beginning, everything comes from this Ave HaKadosh Baruch Hu Leis Leidio B'Tachtenim. This is the bottom line, even if you could say before Helam Atzmi. That's the Rotzen.
I don't know if that's right. Is that right?
Otherwise, I don't see a connection until the end.
Well, it's right that it's correct to say that anything that happens, God wanted it to happen. So, I mean, if that's what you're saying, that everything happened, nothing happened by accident. So everything is very deliberate.
The Rotzen Atzmi, the Galus, the from Lechatchila, the Elam Atzmi, everything is because of Nisave. That's why it was
but if that's so important, why is the Rebbe Rashab not mentioning it?
It's mentioned so much in Chassidus. The Rebbe Rashab himself mentioned it so much.
And how does that add anything to this? I'm not denying that, but why are you adding that? Why is that helping understand this better?
Because we're talking about the Helam Atzmi and why Nasus Atzmi. How is this coming down after that to Biy'a and everything? Everything is starting.
But he's in the middle of a discussion and he's going to speak about the catalyst, what makes it come. But let's see where he goes with this. Fine.
But I have a question before this.
Everybody's talking about something else here. Too many different topics here.
Okay.
I mean, if you want to know what he says in Ayin Beis, I can tell you Ayin Beis. Everything, what's going on in your heads and what you learned in other places, I can't tell you because I'm not a Novi. I'm not a prophet. I can tell you what we learned inside here. What we learned inside so far is that there's the Nekudas HaMalchus, there's the Binyan HaMalchus, the Tesvis, the addition, and that in order for Malchus to be mashpia and to Biy'a, which is what he's really focusing on right now, is Binyan HaMalchus. And that's a whole process, a process of building it with the 10 spheres that come from Zoh. That's all that he really actually says. Everything else is somewhat speculation. And then that's that. So there are two aspects here, Nekudas HaMalchus and now remember, Nekudas HaMalchus is we're talking about Malchus of Atzilus that was emanated originally as a Nekuda. And he explained that Nekuda of Keser Malchus is rooted in Atzmus and Sof all the way in the Helam Atzmi. That's what he said. So based on that, if there's any question, I'm happy to answer it. But that's where let's not lose sight of the actual.
That is my question. I mean, my question is not to the second stage that we haven't learned yet about how we go from this stage that we just discussed today of Nekudas and Malchus and Hisnasus Atzmi to Binyan Malchus. We haven't learned that yet. My question was when you said Malchus, Nekudas and Malchus is so bittul, so tachlis a bittul that it's even. I think you used the expression that it doesn't even have leis le lagarme klum. That it's even doesn't.
That's not Nekudas HaMalchus. He made clear. That's already the hashpah of Malchus. That's already the binyan of Malchus.
Right, leis le lagarme klum. Right, that's already binyan of Malchus. Right. That's what you just said. Is that right?
Yeah.
So if it doesn't even have that level. I'm having trouble still understanding how it could.
I told you, it's a state of being, because you're humanizing it, you're making it like it's human. Is God, let me ask you something, is God fundamentally a kingly personality, in your opinion?
Yes.
And God is also ultimate bittul. So how do you reconcile the two?
I mean, I don't know, Bittel, he's a Yeshemiti.
Yeah, but he doesn't have yesh as in gaiva. He's not substance.
Gaiva doesn't mean, Yesh doesn't imply it has to have Gaiva. So
how do you reconcile God is a kingly nature? Malchus is God's kingly attribute, that God is a kingly personality. Why is that a problem with anything? That kingly personality is called the snasus atzmi, without anything else that exists. At the same time, that kingly personality is not because of itself, is because it's completely encompassed in its source. I don't see the issue with that at all.
By the way, the Rabbi Rashab talks about all this at the bottom of 1214 and top of 1215.
Let me just, if it's truly tachis a bittul, should I stop? I mean, I'm continue on. I guess I don't understand. I'll think about it. But I'm just trying to say that if it's truly tachis bittul, it shouldn't have anything else in it. Even his nasus.
What do you mean? Tachlis habitl is what makes it so kingly. That's what I would say.
Because you can have tachlis habitl that has it doesn't have kingly. It doesn't have not kingly.
That's what tachlis habitl is. The true kingly personality has nothing of his own. He's completely a channel of something greater than himself.
But he's not even a melech. I mean, he doesn't even.
We're not talking about. We're talking about his nasus atzmi. We're not talking about binyan Malchus. We're talking about the Nakud, the Shadish, the essence of what he is. Malchus essentially is a kingly personality because it has nothing of its own, because it's completely about something greater than itself. That's the true king. But that's not a king over people. That's a king. That's not a king over others. That's what's called a true dignified personality. Is not about himself.
That's what I was trying to say, Rabbi. By the way, he talks about this. The bottom of 1214.
But this says no. You were not saying that at all. You were talking about how from that comes the king over the people. I said that's where I don't know the connection. That very fact is nasus atzmi is connected to. Anyway.
Okay.
Yeah, we're all looking for motivations from upstairs.
That's why I said you have to know. Are we talking about the nasus atzmi now, or talking about the nasus of binyan Malchus to become a king over the?
I'm not talking about that at all. But I think you just maybe enlightened me on that. In that you're saying basically, if I heard you correctly, that his nasus atzmi itself is the definition of Malchus. Is it?
At its core, yeah.
Oh, okay. So that's its definition. So it's not two things. It's not Malchus and his nasus of his nasus atzmi. That's Malchus is his nasus atzmi. If that's what you're saying, and that's what the Rebbe is saying, then that's a satisfying answer for me.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Okay. Shkoya, finally got to it. Okay. All right.
Okay. Good.
That's great.
I'm glad we have a happy customer.
Oh yeah. Now I didn't know if I was going to be able to have lunch today if I couldn't get the answer to that.
Okay.
Okay, Shkoya, that was great. That was a good one.
The Sifsei Kohen in Shulchan Aruch, in one place he said that he couldn't sleep a whole night because he didn't have an answer on one question. And then 5 o'clock in the morning, he got the answer, then he allowed himself to go to sleep. Looks like Eliezer is in this darge.
The only thing is that he's talking about sleep. I'm talking about having a meal. A little different level.
Anybody else wants to weigh in about anything here?
I just wanted to say thank you for taking so much extra time to hash through this with us. It's already almost 2-hour class, so thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. That was nice.
This is supposed to be a 2-hour class.
I think it's an hour and a half on Sundays.
From Tzvi's point of view, it's too little.
Well, I'm with
No,
Tzvi.
it was officially from 10 to 12. That's what I learned last year. With 10 years.
Okay, look, I definitely want to, if you can find where Snasus Satsmi is discussed earlier, it would be helpful. I'll look it up. Just
I
Because it's
said
not-
the top of 12, the bottom of 1214, the top of 1215.
I didn't hear. 12:14?
The bottom of 1214 and the top of 1215.
Okay, I'll look it up and we'll compare notes.
Okay.
12:13, 12:14, you're saying.
1214 and 1215.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Yeah, I see. There's more places. But I'll look, that's a good beginning.
He talks about at the bottom of 1216 as well. Into 1217. Quite a bit.
Okay. I see. Okay, so I'm gonna look into it. Okay.
Yeah, yes, sir. How do you look up things so fast? How do you do that?
The PDF is digitized. So if you can search in Hebrew inside the PDF, you can find what you're looking for. So you have to search for the Hebrew words. So it's not that difficult.
Okay.
Then you have to read what you find and make sure.
Hisnasus atzmis, what are the Hebrew words that you put in?
Hisnasus atzmi. Then you have to read it and make sure it's relevant to what we're talking about. Otherwise, you're sending people on a wild goose chase. Anyways, Rabbi, thank you very much. It was a wonderful class.
I think if you also put in, by the way, the words Hoid v'Hadar, you'll also find something on it.
Okay.
Not just in volume 3, I think in volume 2 as well.
Okay, I'll check it out later.
Okay, everybody, we'll sign off now. Let me first of all, 1 second. We finished the end of the paragraph on page 1361. We'll go over it again. We'll keep doing it.